Welcome to True Echo, where real emotions meet unforgettable stories. Today's story is about sacrifice, silence, and a love that outlived the uniform. What began as a quiet rejection at a funeral turned into a reckoning that stunned an entire church. She was denied entry, until one soldier stood up and revealed the truth that changed everything. Stay until the very end, this story will leave you breathless. The sky over Mobile, Alabama was heavy that Saturday morning, painted in dull shades of gray. Flags flapped listlessly at half-mast outside the white-steepled church on Dauphin Street. The air was still, the kind that made people whisper out of habit, as though silence could keep grief from getting louder. Evelyn May Carter stood on the sidewalk, 76 years old and dressed in a plain black coat that had seen better days. Her shoes were polished, but old. In her hand, she held a single white rose, no bouquet, no dramatic flair. Just one rose, carried with reverence. She walked slowly toward the entrance, each step deliberate, as though she were balancing memory and grief in equal measure. Before she reached the church steps, a man in a sharp navy blue suit stepped in front of her. He had the air of authority, mustache trimmed to military precision, aviator sunglasses, and a face that didn't do much smiling. "Ma'am," he said softly but firmly, "this is a private service. Family only." Evelyn blinked. "Private?" she echoed. He gave a single nod. "Family only." The words hit her like a shove. She turned her head and caught sight of the flag-draped casket just inside the doors. Rows of people in suits and dark dresses murmured quietly, their faces a sea of half-familiar strangers. No one looked at her. And if they did, they looked away just as quickly. "I was close to Michael," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We have strict instructions." She didn't argue. Didn't cry. Just nodded, her grip on the rose tightening until her knuckles turned pale. With a straight back and trembling legs, Evelyn turned and began to walk away. The crowd behind her resumed their whispers, unaware of the weight that was slowly walking away from them. No one knew her name. No one asked who she was. To them, she was just an old woman with no bloodline claim. But to Michael, the man they were burying, she had been everything. Evelyn's steps slowed as she reached the end of the sidewalk. Her knees trembled, but not from age, from the familiar ache of being unseen in a moment she had earned the right to share. She paused at the corner and leaned on the iron post, not for support, but to steady the storm quietly swirling inside her. Her other hand still gripped the white rose, now slightly bent where her fingers pressed too tightly. Behind her, voices carried on, a woman whispering to her husband, "Who was that?" "No idea," he muttered. "Probably just confused." But Evelyn wasn't confused. She was remembered by no one and forgotten by everyone, except one. Private Deshaun Briggs had arrived late, his boots scuffing the polished floor as he took a quiet place in the back of the church. The uniform he wore was tight across the shoulders, freshly pressed, his mother's doing. She'd told him, "When you wear that, they see more than just you." Deshaun didn't quite understand those words until today. He hadn't known Sergeant Michael Landry well, they'd only met once, overseas. But Michael had saved his life. In one blinding moment of chaos, gunfire, and sand, Michael had pulled Deshaun and two others from a kill zone. That moment left a mark, deeper than any scar. So Deshaun came to pay respects. No one expected him to speak. He hadn't planned to. He was just there to stand still and remember. Until he saw her. That back. That walk. That presence, quiet, but proud. A woman slowly retreating from the church like a stranger. And then she turned her head slightly. That tilt. That same tilt she'd given him when he couldn't pronounce February in second grade. It hit him like a thunderclap. He pushed past a cluster of mourners, knocking over a folding chair in the process. "Miss Evelyn," he called. She stopped. Slowly, she turned. When she saw his face, something changed in her eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. "Deshawn," she said. "Yes, ma'am. It's me. Deshawn Briggs, from Belvedere Street." She smiled, not big, but real. "You got tall," she said. He laughed. "You told me I would. Said I had long legs even when I was small." Her smile lingered, a rare softness breaking through. He looked toward the church. Did they turn you away?" "They said it was for family," she replied, as if trying to apologize for the disrespect herself. Deshawn clenched his jaw, turned toward the crowd, and said firmly, "You're coming with me." Evelyn hesitated. "Don't want to cause no trouble." He offered his arm. "You already caused something. You helped raise Michael. You are family. If they don't know it, they need to." He didn't wait for her to agree. He just stood, tall and steady, offering his elbow. Finally, she slipped her arm through his. With the white rose still in hand, Evelyn walked back up the steps, this time beside a man who owed his life to the boy she had raised. Inside the church, the choir had begun to hum a low, mournful harmony. Michael's mother, Liana, sat on the front pew with her head bowed. Her posture was rigid, a woman barely holding it together. Flanked by two older church members, she looked like someone used to grief but never ready for this kind. As Deshawn and Evelyn approached, eyes turned. Whispers stirred. An usher stood up from his place near the aisle, ready to intercept again. Deshawn raised his hand, not aggressively, but firmly. "She belongs here," he said, loud enough to hush the murmurs. "More than most of us." The room froze. One by one, people turned. Not to gawk, but to look. Really look. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence filled the space like incense, subtle but heavy with meaning. She looked at the casket. The rose trembled slightly in her hand. Deshawn cleared his throat. He hadn't planned to say anything. But his heart pushed words out of him like water breaking through a dam. "You all have no idea who this woman is," he said, stepping into the center aisle. A cousin of Michael's, seated on the third row, muttered, "That can't be true." Deshawn turned. "Really? If she wasn't close, how come she fed him? Walked him to school? Sat with him after his dad died?" More murmurs. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't wear a uniform. But she raised Michael when it counted. He looked at Evelyn. "You want to tell them, Miss Evelyn?" She shook her head gently. "No, baby. You say it." So he did. "I was 10 when I met her. My mom worked nights. I was loud, hungry, and didn't know how to read past the first chapter of a book. Miss Evelyn took me in. Fed me. Ironed my school shirts. Taught me to sound out words instead of giving up. And she did the same for Michael." He turned back to the pews. She was the first person he called Nana. Not as a nickname, as a title. People began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The truth was heavy, heavier than grief. Michael's cousin stood again. "If she's that important, why wasn't she in the program?" Deshawn didn't blink. Maybe because no one asked. That shut the cousin up. Evelyn still didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence now spoke louder than all the murmuring. Then Liana stood. Her knees wobbled slightly. But her voice, though cracked, was clear. "Is that you, Miss Evelyn?" she asked. Evelyn nodded. "It's me, Liana." Recognition dawned. Like sunlight after a storm. Slow, warm, undeniable. "I didn't know you were here," Liana whispered. "I didn't want to intrude," Evelyn replied. "Just wanted to leave a flower and go." Liana's face crumpled. "Michael used to say you made the best cornbread in Alabama." He cried when he couldn't sleep at your house. Evelyn smiled gently. He used to hide his green beans under his napkin. A small ripple of laughter fluttered across the church. Then, quietly, Liana said, "Come sit with me." Evelyn paused. The whole room waited with her. And then she moved forward. No one stopped her this time. She sat beside Liana, not as a guest, but as someone who had always belonged. The church had grown silent again, but not the kind of stiff, awkward silence that came before. This one was reverent. The kind that meant something sacred had just happened, and no one dared speak too soon. Evelyn sat next to Liana, the white rose laid gently in her lap. Her hands were still, folded neatly, resting on decades of untold memories. Liana sat beside her, shoulders shaking every few minutes as a tissue moved up and down between her face and her fingers. The two women didn't need to speak, they'd already said what mattered. Deshawn stood off to the side, near the choir stand. He hadn't sat back down. His eyes scanned the faces around the room. They weren't hostile. Just stunned. As if each of them had to silently unlearn what they thought they knew about Michael Landry. Then the preacher cleared his throat. His voice was warm, southern, and steady. "Miss Evelyn," he said, stepping up to the pulpit. "We didn't know. I didn't know. Sometimes, we forget that family isn't just who shares your blood, but who shares your burden." He looked toward the front pew. "Thank you for loving Michael the way you did." He turned slightly to Liana. "Would you like to say a few words?" Liana didn't rise. She didn't need the microphone. She simply reached for Evelyn's hand and held it like someone clinging to something lost and finally found. "I used to tell people I raised Michael on my own," she said softly, her voice cracking. "But I didn't. Not really. I had help. I had her." She turned to Evelyn. "You kept him steady when I couldn't. You fed him when I was scraping together dinner shifts. You sat with him when he had nightmares and I didn't have the strength to. You filled in the cracks." Evelyn's lips parted just slightly. Her eyes glistened. "I didn't thank you," Liana said. "I never said it out loud. I just let time move on." "You don't owe me thank you," Evelyn replied gently. "You did what you had to. And I did what I needed to." Then, for the first time all day, Evelyn allowed a single tear to roll down her cheek. One. But it was enough to undo the entire room. The preacher stepped forward again, holding a small envelope. "There's something else," he said. "Something Michael left behind. A letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone. But now I think we all know who it was meant for." He unfolded the letter with deliberate care. The room held its breath. "If anything happens to me," the preacher read, "don't cry for long. I lived how I wanted. I went where I was needed. But if you're reading this, I want you to know something important." Evelyn sat straighter, hands folded tight. "The person who taught me what it means to care, to stand tall, to never back down from what's right, that person didn't wear medals or speak from a podium. She had tired feet, strong hands, and a voice that made the dark seem smaller." The room shifted. Shoulders slumped. Eyes welled. "She knew how to fix buttons and hearts. She taught me that bravery isn't about being loud, it's about showing up, every single day, even when no one claps." The preacher's voice wavered slightly as he reached the last lines. "If I didn't say it enough, I love you, Nana. Thank you for raising me. For being my home." A gasp escaped someone in the third pew. Another woman openly wept. The preacher folded the letter with trembling fingers and handed it to Evelyn. She didn't rush. She reached out slowly and took it as if it were made of glass. No one clapped. No one dared. The moment didn't need noise. But in every heart in that room, something changed, permanently. Evelyn May Carter wasn't just someone who knew Michael. She was the reason he had become someone worth knowing. After the preacher stepped away, the organist returned to the keys, letting soft, slow chords rise like smoke. It wasn't just music now, it was memory. The casket at the front seemed to settle more deeply into its place, like even it had heard the truth and was finally at rest. Evelyn didn't move. The letter sat in her lap, pressed flat beneath her palm. Her shoulders remained square, though her heart thudded with the force of everything she never thought would be spoken. For decades, she had walked through this world helping others stay upright, never asking for applause. But now, the room saw her. Not as a neighbor. Not as someone with no relation. But as Nana. As family. When the service ended, people rose slowly. Some lingered in their pews, unsure if they should approach. Others filtered into the parking lot, sunglasses back on, heads low with reflection. Deshaun waited for Evelyn and Liana at the aisle. "You okay?" he asked Evelyn. "I'm all right, baby," she said, her voice low but firm. "Tired, that's all. You want me to drive you home?" Evelyn shook her head and tapped her cane once on the ground. "These legs still work. Besides, I know every crack in that sidewalk better than most folks know their own names." Liana slipped her arm through Evelyn's. "Then let's walk together." Outside, the heat had returned. Sunlight pressed down harder than it had all morning, but it didn't feel heavy now, it felt earned. As they stepped down the church steps, people turned again. This time not out of curiosity or confusion, but out of reverence. A young woman from the choir rushed over, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "I didn't know who you were," she said, her voice shaking. "But I sang today because of Michael. I read some of his journals last year. He talked about you all the time." Evelyn blinked. "He did?" The young woman nodded. "He said you were the strongest person he'd ever met. That your hands never rested but your voice could calm a storm." Evelyn let out a soft laugh. "He noticed that, huh?" More people approached. Old classmates. Neighbors. A pair of soldiers in crisp uniforms, hands clasped respectfully in front of them. They didn't say much, just offered nods, handshakes, and quiet acknowledgments. Then came the man in the navy blue suit. The same one who had stopped her at the gate. His eyes were on the ground, his steps deliberate and unsure. When he reached her, he paused. The weight of his mistake made his shoulders slope. He didn't justify. Didn't try to explain. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I didn't know." Evelyn looked at him, not with anger, but with something gentler and more difficult to carry, disappointment. "You know now," she said. And that was all. He nodded and stepped away, the silence behind him louder than any scolding would have been. Deshaun leaned in. "You handled that better than I would've." "I've had practice," she said. The walk to Jefferson Street wasn't far, but it felt like a pilgrimage. As they passed corners Michael used to ride his bike around, Evelyn told stories. About his favorite cereal, dry Fruit Loops out of the box, the time he taped paper wings to his arms and jumped off her porch, he broke a flower pot, not bones, the day he brought home a stray cat that had no tail but endless attitude. Deshaun laughed. "He used to chase me around the block with a stick when I wouldn't share my ice cream." "He was fast," Evelyn said. "But sneaky. Used to hide his green beans in his socks." By the time they reached her front steps, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows that spilled across the cracked pavement. The rusted gate creaked open like an old friend welcoming her home. "I've got iced tea inside," Evelyn said, her voice lighter now. "Can't drink it all by myself." Liana and Deshaun followed her in. Inside, the apartment was warm and quiet. The curtains let in soft golden light. The couch had a familiar dip in the middle. A crocheted blanket was folded on the armrest, and a row of photos lined a worn bookshelf, most in mismatched frames. There were children's faces, including a young Michael grinning with missing teeth. One picture showed him in his prom tux, arms awkwardly folded. Another in fatigues, standing beside Deshawn, both covered in dust and smiling like they had nothing left to prove. Evelyn walked straight to a small wooden box on the coffee table. She opened it slowly and placed Michael's final letter inside, resting it atop old birthday cards, faded ribbons, and a bent house key. Then she closed the lid and kept her hand on top for a moment, eyes distant. "I used to keep crayon drawings in there," she said. "Now it holds weight." Liana sat on the couch, looking around the room. "Michael used to talk about this place all the time. I never stopped long enough to come see it." "You were busy trying to keep things afloat," Evelyn said. "We all were." Deshawn wandered over to the shelf, pointing to a photo. "Is that me?" "I'm holding a plastic fork and laughing." "You pushed Michael's face into a birthday cake," Evelyn said, smiling. "He chased you with that fork for a full hour." The room filled with gentle laughter, the kind that lives next to tears. And then Evelyn stood again. "There's something else," she said. "Something Michael left behind, but it's for you." From the drawer near the kitchen, Evelyn pulled out a worn envelope. Its corners were curled, the paper yellowed slightly with time. Written across the front in thick, uneven handwriting was one word, Nana. "I found this a week after the soldiers came," she said quietly. It was tucked inside one of his old shoeboxes. He must have written it before the deployment, maybe longer back. She held the envelope in her hand for a long moment before turning and offering it to Deshawn. "You read it," she said softly. "I think he'd want you to." Deshawn took it slowly, like something sacred. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the letter. Evelyn sat back down on the couch, Liana beside her, both women watching him like he held more than paper, he held time, memory, and truth. Deshawn began to read, his voice tight but steady. "Dear Nana. If anything ever happens to me, don't sit alone too long. Don't let people forget you. You were my beginning. And no matter where I went, Afghanistan, Iraq, Germany, I carried your voice with me. You used to tell me I'd grow into my shoes. I didn't know you meant life, too. You made me brave, even when you were scared. You taught me that strong doesn't mean loud. And that love don't always come with a name tag. If folks ever look past you, tell them this. You raised a man who mattered. A man who tried. A man who remembered where he came from. Don't cry, Nana. Or if you do, cry proud. I'll see you again someday, and I'll bring your sweet tea with me." By the time Deshawn finished, his eyes were glassy. He lowered the letter slowly, as if to return it to Evelyn's hands would also return the heart that had written it. Evelyn didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, she reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Liana's face. Then she smiled, gentle and tired, but real. "Stubborn, till the end," she said. Even his goodbye got the last word. Liana leaned her head against Evelyn's shoulder, and Deshawn sat across from them, the letter still in his lap, as if afraid to fold it again. Silence filled the room, this time not of grief, but of shared warmth. "You gave him everything," Liana said, voice hushed. "No," Evelyn replied. "He gave it back." Outside, the sky began to shift, late afternoon light casting soft golden hues through the window panes. A breeze stirred the edge of the crocheted blanket, and somewhere outside, a neighbor's wind chime whispered in the stillness. The three of them stayed like that for a while, wrapped in memory and peace. Later, after Liana and Deshawn had gone, Evelyn sat at the small table by the window, a glass of iced tea in her hand and Michael's second letter resting beneath her palm. The street outside was still and sun-washed, the shadows long and lazy. She reread the letter again, lips moving silently with each word. It was strange, she thought, how a single life could echo through so many others. How her love, quiet and persistent, had shaped a man whose courage had shaped the world. No medals had ever come her way, no speeches, no acknowledgments, but her fingerprints were everywhere in the man they buried that day. And now, the world finally knew. The next morning, Evelyn woke before sunrise. She didn't sleep much anymore, not since the knock on her door weeks earlier. But this morning felt different. Lighter. Not because her heart didn't ache, but because it ached in the open now. The silence that used to press against her ribs had been broken. People had heard. They had seen. And more importantly, they would remember. She made her tea, always 2 spoonfuls of sugar, never more, never less, and stood by the window as the first golden light painted the tops of the trees on Jefferson Street. The letter from Michael rested beside her cup, folded neatly, safely tucked inside a protective sleeve she'd found in her Bible drawer. After a quiet moment, she picked up the phone. Jefferson Elementary, the cheery voice answered. "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn said. "This is Evelyn Carter. I don't have a child enrolled, not anymore. But I was wonderin' if y'all might need a volunteer reader for your first grade class." There was a pause on the other end. Then a soft chuckle. "We'd love that, Miss Carter." She smiled. "I've raised a few kids in this town. Figured it was time I shared some stories again." A week later, the Mobile Daily ran a 3-paragraph article under the Community section. Unsung hero honored at local soldier's funeral. It included one photo, Evelyn sitting on the front pew of the church, the white rose in her lap and Michael's letter pressed gently in her hands. The article didn't call her a neighbor. It didn't call her a guest. It named her as she should have been named all along, Nana Evelyn Johnson, the woman who helped raise Sergeant Michael Landry and a generation of children who called her home. The article didn't go viral. There were no hashtags. But it found its way into the hands of those who mattered. The librarian at Jefferson Elementary clipped it and hung it in the office window. A soldier who served with Michael mailed it to his mother in Atlanta. A local historian copied it into a small archive under Women of Influence in Mobile. And as for Evelyn, she didn't need a crowd to remember. She just needed to know the story wouldn't disappear. That Sunday, she returned to the church. Not as a stranger. Not even as a guest. But as Nana Evelyn. A seat was waiting for her, this time without question. The usher from before greeted her with a bowed head and a whispered, "I'm glad you're here." She simply nodded. And when the choir began to sing, her voice joined in, low and steady, like a hum that had always been there but finally had room to rise. Later that evening, she sat on her porch, rocking gently as twilight wrapped the neighborhood in soft purples and blues. A vase on the table held a new white rose. Michael's letters were tucked safely inside the wooden box, now resting atop a folded flag and a small slip of paper with one word on it, Evelyn. Because her name mattered too. She looked toward the sky, eyes following the fading light. "I told you I'd outlive you, didn't I, boy?" she whispered. Then she smiled, leaned back, and let the wind carry his memory across the porch, across the town, across time. Love doesn't always wear a title. Family isn't always written in blood. Sometimes, the most powerful lives are the quiet ones, the ones who give without asking, who raise without being asked, who love without needing credit. Evelyn May Carter wasn't in the program. But she was always in Michael's story. And now, she's in ours. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your life who stood quietly behind you, who gave without keeping score, say their name. Share their story. Because silence is where too many good lives get lost, and today, we broke that silence for one.